everybody. Welcome to Aviation for Girls Engage E-Learning. We have forest services and firefighting tonight, and we have an amazing guest specialist and a featured specialist. While you get ready, we're going to launch our first poll, which is, have you practiced using or have you used a fire extinguisher? So you can go ahead and answer that live on our polls. We're going to launch that. And let's see. I will tell you, I have practiced using one. At our Girls in Aviation Day at DCA, the fire department brought this, it was kind of like a video game screen, and they had a real fire extinguisher, but the way that it was connected, it allowed you to put out the fire on the screen. Keith or Maddie, have you seen that or demonstrated one of those?
I've never seen that. Keith may have.
I have. We actually used to take that around the facilities to have people practice using a fire extinguisher, starting at the base and spreading it and then working your way up. And it was much cheaper than using real fire extinguishers. Not as fun, but cheaper.
Yeah, absolutely. I had a lot of fun using it. I scored very badly. The girl behind me at Girls in Aviation Day got about 10 times better than I did. So, um, but it was really fun. So awesome. Great job. We have 100% have not practiced using a fire extinguisher. Amazing. So we can go ahead and share those results. And while we're here, we'll just go over our customs. Remember, we respect everyone. We are recording, so this will go up on YouTube. You can use the Q&A to ask questions. Please send us questions, or even if you want to comment, you can use the Q&A because that'll come to us and I could read them out loud. Be thoughtful about your questions, so think and pay attention. If you're asking something and listening, make sure it's a question we haven't gone over, or if you want to clarify it, that's fine, just clarify it. You can raise your hand if you want to ask a question live, and use the reactions. Can I see some reactions now? I'd love to see some reactions. Let's see. And most important, we're gonna have fun. We're just gonna learn about an amazing career, learn about some opportunities. There's some reactions. So we have our introductions, our guest specialist, Maddie Wilbanks, and we have Keith Hackbarth here with us. They will be here for a Q&A, and we have our Gravity Buster activity. We're going to announce our costume contest winner, and we'll have our closing announcements. All right, so without further ado, I'm on the call. Miss Sabrina Carr, who is our communications coordinator, is on the call helping. And we have our guest specialist, Maddie Wilbanks. She is a lead plane pilot with the U.S. Forest Service. She has call sign lead 84. Maddie, correct me if I need that. And she is an ATP, a CFI, CFII, and multi-engine instrument. And we have Keith Hackbarth, who is Assistant Fire Director in Aviation with the U.S. Forest Service for the Southern Region Fire and Aviation Management. So welcome, Maddie and Keith. Do you want to tell us a little bit about what inspired you to join aviation and forest services?
For me, I started flying pretty young. I was about 18, and I got my private at 19, and then just worked my way through my ratings. I spent a lot of time doing other things in the industry. I tried a little bit of everything, and found myself at the end of all that in aerial firefighting. So it was a long journey, and I think it was a good decision to try a little bit of everything. You know, there's a lot of aviation jobs out there. So I gave everything a shot, and then found this job, and really fell in love with it. So, you know, I like I said, there's a ton of opportunities out there, and there's a ton of opportunities within aerial firefighting, and fire and aviation in general. So that's kind of what got me into it. And Keith has a kind of a different experience and different paths, you know. So
Yeah, so I went the exact opposite way of everybody in my family. My mother, father, brother, uncle, aunt, grandfather, and other grandfather, they were all in aviation in some aspect, everything from pounding rivets and Bell helicopters to ATC and things like that. And when I was 18, I raised my hand and said, I'm going to go play in the woods because who doesn't like playing in the woods? And that's how I put my foot first in the door for the U.S. Forest Service, as being a wildland firefighter out on the ground. I happily tell everybody I run into that asks questions about my job that it's truly one of the best jobs in the world. I get to play with airplanes, helicopters, chainsaws, and explosives. And how can you not have a good time with all of that? And now I've moved up into my career where I get to deal with people who are actually flying those assets like Maddie. It's just been a heck of a ride, and I love every minute of it.
Well, thank you both for sharing. So, we have this video a little bit about what Keith and what Maddie does. Maddie, you can talk us through it if you want.
Well, what I want you guys to pay attention to as you're watching some of these clips is just what kind of different terrains do you see, different areas that wildfires can burn, and then other things like obstacles, man-made obstacles, and just kind of pay attention to those things. This last clip, you see that plane that just came by, that's a lead plane. And then this is an air tanker. So that clip is pretty important to kind of give you some context.
Thanks so much, Maddie. So tell us about what it is to be the lead plane. I noticed in the video, it looked like you marked a location. Is that what you were doing in that last clip?
Yeah, so there's kind of three parts to being a lead plane pilot, and it really starts with the guy behind the lead plane. That's a picture of a lead plane right there, and you see the little smoke coming out. Behind that airplane is a pretty big airplane, right? So the Forest Service and other agencies started using really big airplanes to put water and fire retardant around these wildfires. And these airplanes are the kind of airplanes that you might get on to go on vacation. They're very big, and their original design was to take off, go fly up to a really high altitude, come down, and land safely at an airport. They weren't necessarily originally designed to be flown, at low altitudes in the mountains and doing some of the things we do. So, a couple of the issues that these big air tankers might have, number one, when they get to a wildfire, there are not just people in the air, there's people on the ground. So, there are firefighters on the ground that are engaging with that fire. They need to be able to communicate and coordinate with those people to tactically make good decisions. And where do we want to put this fire retardant? Where do we want to put the water? So that's kind of one leg of what they would have to do. The second leg is that it might not just be one airplane. When we get these really big wildfires, you could have up to 10 of these air tankers and even more. Really big aircraft. There can be even bigger air tankers than this one. There's small single engine air tankers, and there's helicopters. Yeah, here's some examples. That's another aerial supervision platform. You can keep going down if you've got the other aircraft pictures. Yeah, so that you can imagine the airplane in the first photo that was behind the lead plane, that big, that was a C-130. This is a single engine air tanker. That's a pretty small aircraft compared to that big one. And everybody's mixing together and playing kind of in the same sandbox, so to speak. So that's kind of the second issue, is that number one, you've got people on the ground. You got to figure out how to tactically fight the fire. Number two, there's a lot of aircraft in a very small space, all trying to work together. Number three is that, as I said before, these really big airplanes sometimes have to go down into some kind of tight spaces, you know, tall canyons, cliffs, and maybe they're going into an urban area where there's power lines, where there's, you probably saw in the video, there's windmills, other man-made things that you might not be able to see until you're kind of down close to it. So those three are kind of the big three um, issues, obstacles, if you will, that might inhibit somebody from being effective on a fire. So in order to solve that, we have what's called a lead plane. And a lead plane is a type of aerial supervision. So I'm more of a supervisor, but my job is three parts. So to solve the first part, the first problem, I coordinate with the ground. I have 6 radios in my airplane, and 3 of them can broadcast 2 channels at a time. So really, I'm listening to about 9 frequencies at once. I talk to the ground folks. I figure out how we want to attack this. And I've been trained to know how to do that. I understand the tactics behind how we want to fight a wildfire. So I can make those decisions. I can communicate and coordinate with the ground and make sure that nobody gets hurt, make sure that no retardant gets dropped anywhere close to people and things like that. To solve the second problem, I coordinate all the aircraft in the airspace. So just like an air traffic controller says, you're going to come in and land first, you're second, turn this way, you're going to follow this person. That I do those things as well. So when air tankers check into a fire, they call me, much like an air traffic controller. I give them a clearance. I tell them where to go. I tell them if I need them to come in or maybe hold out, and I sequence the single engine planes with helicopters and assets that are flying a little bit differently, or water scooping aircraft. So the second leg of my job is to make sure that we all are coordinated, that nobody is running into anybody, that all that metal in the sky is safe. The third part is that I actually will go down to where the air tankers are going to fly. So I fly low to the ground, and I basically practice the run that the air tanker is going to do. So if an air tanker needs to put retardant, you know, down kind of a draw into a canyon, I'll go do that first. I test it out. I try to see what the wind conditions are doing. I try to see if there's anything hazardous. Are there wires? Are there any man-made structures that are going to be a problem? I basically test the waters for them. And then once I kind of figure out the best way to attack this run and the safest way to escape, to exit and for us all to be on our way, those air tankers actually physically get behind me, and I lead them. So they will follow me all the way around. And when I get to the spot where I want that fire retardant to be dropped, I press a button in my airplane and a little puff of smoke comes out, and that kind of X marks the spot for them. So that's really the big explanation of what I do. Um, and there's a lot of different roles that different aircraft play, but my my role in particular is as a supervisor. So yeah, I don't know. I guess we should maybe take questions or something if there are any at that point.
Yeah, I mean, I have a question. So, what makes you choose between dropping water or dropping the retardant?
That's a very good question. So water is used just for putting out fire. Water is applied directly onto a fire. Um, it doesn't serve a purpose like fire retardant does, in that fire retardant actually slows the progress of fire. So when a wildfire hits a line of fire retardant, it's actually going to take those flame lengths way down. You are coating the grass or the trees or whatever it is with that substance, and it's going to change the fire behavior. So fire retardant isn't made to actually put fire out. It's made to slow the fire's progress so that the people on the ground can actually put it out. When it comes to water, water is applied directly onto the flames in an effort to extinguish it. So that's kind of the difference between the two strategies. And when we use fire retardant, um, typically the most basic strategy is to actually, if you can imagine, a fire as a circle on a piece of paper, we're just trying to draw a line all the way around it with that retardant. We want to fully encompass the fire in that fire retardant. And in doing so, we've kind of created a catcher's mitt that slows that progress down and allows um, folks on the ground to engage and fully put the fire out.
Excellent. So then when you drop that, I heard you say you want to make sure that people are not around. So how do you
Mhm.
coordinate the air operations and the ground operations? And maybe Keith, if you want to speak a little bit to the ground operations as well, when you were working on a wildfire.
Yeah, I can jump in on that side. So it Maddie did an outstanding job of explaining the difference between retardant and water. And what people have to remember is that water, a gallon of water weighs around 8 pounds, and a gallon of retardant coming out of an aircraft is around 9 to 11, depending on the mixtures. And Maddie knows that all way better than I do. But you have to think about that as the small aircraft that you see on the screen, everybody, that's holding around 700 gallons of water. And when you go to one of the bigger aircraft that Maddie was talking about, they can hold up to almost 10,000 gallons of water, or excuse me, retardant. So that's a lot of weight coming out of an aircraft. And the reason we want to make sure the ground resources are out of that area is because the weight of all of that water or retardant coming out can dislodge rocks and trees, and it can make it a very hazardous work environment for the firefighters on the ground trying to suppress that fire. So, as Maddie talked about before, there's a lot of communication going on in the air. There is a lot of communication going on in the ground, and it can be just like a web of conversation going on back and forth. And to try and minimize the confusion so that we can have good, clear communications as a ground unit talking to Maddie, who is in the sky, we kind of go through a chain of command. Not every firefighter should be able to hit their radio and talk to Maddie unless they see a hazard and say, "Hey, that there's this. Do you see this?" or something like that. But it would be me as a firefighter talking to our division force leader, who would then communicate up to Maddie and make sure that the line is clear and that she has possibly what we're trying to help her target to look at where we want the retardant or the water, so that it's just one person talking to one person and Maddie's not getting 6 different stories from 9 different people. It can be very confusing. And as she said, she's listening to 6 different radios and different frequencies. There's other air tankers moving into it. So we have to really work hard on trying to make that fire environment, especially in the sky, as safe as possible and really good, crisp communication. So it's a lot of things going on. Jokingly, we always say fire is a very dynamic beast, and it is. And that's just from us talking about it because of everything going on. We're all a bunch of firefighters trying to do the job, but you have engines and hot shots, which are people actually digging line. You have Maddie with single engine air tankers and VLATs, which are very large air tankers coming in. And we have people trying to leave the area. It's very confusing at times. And the best thing to do is talk clearly, plainly, and succinctly so that we know what's going on, so that we make it safe for everybody out there doing their job.
Awesome, thank you. So, in this picture, the last picture, Maddie, whoops, maybe I can go back. This was a picture after you marked it and the plane behind you is dropping, right? So,
Yes. Yeah.
I'm just
This is a
gonna
Go ahead.
summarize real quick. So, the retardant is making that circle kind of like, and then the waters are going for the bullseye. Does that make sense? Is that kind
Yeah.
of how it works?
Yeah, I think that's a simple way to put it. And this photo in particular is, um, what I see if I were to turn and look over my shoulder. So I've come through this area first. That's actually a very large air tanker, a VLAT behind me. That's what's dropping that retardant. Um, and I've marked the spot where I want the retardant to go. And you can see if we were just to continue, if you were to continue to be able to watch these drops happen, we would just be moving down, yep, where you're putting your mouse. We'd be moving down the sides and then eventually across the front, to just try to create that catcher's mitt. And there are multiple aircraft that deliver water. There's helicopters that will use things like a bucket or a snorkel, and they will, I think we have a helicopter picture in there somewhere. There you go. So some helicopters have like a tank system like this, some have a bucket, but the result is the same. That helicopters are going to go to a local lake, river, water source. I've even seen them dip out of, water tanks for cattle, and they're going to gather up as much water as they can. They're going to take it over to the fire, and they're going to dump it directly on the flames, right on top, like you said, like a bullseye. There's also aircraft that are called scoopers, multi-engine scoopers or single-engine scoopers, depending on how many engines they have. That's what this is. Those aircraft go to, again, a local water source, although their water sources might have to be a little different because they're not a helicopter that can sit in place and, grab water. They've actually got to be able to go across the surface. Um, so they're going to scout out a local water source that works for them. They will actually scoop across the surface of the water, and the belly of that aircraft will gather that water, and they will fly to the fire, much like an air tanker does. And they're going to make kind of a similar pattern, but their water, again, is going to go directly on the flames. So there's not really an instance, um, typically, that we're ever going to put water anywhere in the vicinity of the fire that's not just directly on those flames or as close to them as we can get, because sometimes the smoke gets very heavy. It's hard to see. So sometimes we're just doing the best we can, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Of course. And speaking of the smoke and visibility and safety precautions, are there precautions built into the aircraft that help you so that you're not inhaling smoke, or do you wear masks? And then how do you use your instruments if the visibility is lower?
So I'll talk to it from the flying side first.
Sure.
A prerequisite to being a lead plane pilot is that you have to have, um, you know, uh, experience that's on the level of, your entry level airline pilot or somebody that's doing something else in the industry. So you've already accumulated quite a bit of experience in instrument flying. Another element to my job is that I have an aircraft that I'm essentially responsible for, but it's also my ride to work. So I have to be able to take my airplane from its hangar, which is in Northeast Atlanta, and I have to fly it to Oregon or Washington or California or New Mexico, and the weather's not always perfect. Um, I've got to be able to do things like shoot instrument approaches and use my instruments for that. So I've got to have knowledge and experience just as a pilot in general. Um, so when it comes to things like heavy smoke, um, smoke can play a role in visibility. I don't know, depending on where people live in the country, maybe you've seen when there's a lot of fires out west, the air is really smoky, right? So when we're flying, sometimes we're in instrument conditions as we're trying to travel out to a fire. Um, when the conditions are so smoky that we can't really see and we don't have good visibility, we won't continue the operation because that's unsafe. But sometimes just going back and forth, we might be in an area that's very smoky. So I have to use those instrument skills, to be able sometimes to get back and forth and just to travel to and from work. In terms of safety equipment for inhaling smoke. We don't have anything like that in the aircraft. The aircraft's pressurized, meaning that it is sealed. I can set pressurization to kind of allow me to be sealed inside the aircraft, but otherwise there's filtration systems and air conditioning and things like that. So it's not a big concern. The amount of time that I spend actually heavily flying in smoke is minimal. That's something that we avoid, and so it's not particularly a concern. Um, and lastly, in terms of the flying thing, my aircraft has an infrared camera on the front of it, so I can see through smoke. Um, Sometimes, if all you can see is smoke on the ground, it's hard to kind of figure out where the fire actually begins and ends. So that infrared camera can kind of help me with that issue. So,
Because that allows you to see where it's hottest too, right?
hmm hmm
Or where to make that circle, or where to guide someone to put that bullseye if they're working with water. That's great.
yeah, if you go up to one of the photos that one of my photos, that's not a good example. Yeah, like this one's pretty good. Um, so you can see in this photo, there's a lot of smoke that's that's pushing up to that right side of the picture there. That doesn't mean that the fire is all the way over there. That smoke is being pushed by the wind across there. So we don't know exactly where the fire begins and ends. At least from the air, we don't know that. So that's where some of these tools can help us actually get a good picture of what the fire is doing and where it currently sits. Um, so that's what we use our infrared camera for.
Very cool.
And I
Keaton.
want to reiterate something that Maddie
Yeah.
said is safety is number one for our firefighters, both on the ground and in the air. We never ask them to fly into terrain like this, to be flying through the smoke at low altitude to do the water drop. It is always their preference of what they're looking at and if they feel safe. And we have never said, "Oh, come on, you can push through there," or "You got this. We need you." If they don't like what they're seeing out their window, we respect that 1,000,000% because they're the ones that are having to deal with that stuff. So safety is always number one in our world, especially with aviation and dealing with firefighting. There's already so many different things going on that are just crazy. We definitely don't want to add to it.
Absolutely. Thank you for adding to that. Yeah, safety. I think safety was where I was going with the question, like what safety precautions that you have. But yeah, that answered it. And infrared is really cool. That's something we didn't talk about. So, but it makes so much sense that you would have that tool to help you navigate. We do have a question from one of our attendees, and Aria is asking, "What places have you flown to?" It sounds like you listed a bunch. Are there pictures of particular places that we have here too?
Um, well, I think the way to kind of explain where we go, where we travel. Fire is kind of seasonal, so the fire season sort of starts in the spring, late spring, and goes until about this time of year. That's the meat of the fire season, the bulk of it. Um, we, as lead plane pilots, we are kind of nationally assigned. So I do live in the Southeast. I live in Georgia, but I don't just work in Georgia or work out of Georgia. I work all over the country. So, in the beginning of the year, typically, the fire season starts in places like Texas, and then it moves over into New Mexico and Arizona. And then as the year progresses into the summer, you start seeing some activity in places like Colorado and Utah and Nevada. So I kind of start traveling from there up to Colorado and Utah and Nevada. And then starts to work its way up towards Idaho, and then Oregon and Washington and Northern California. And then by the end of the year, kind of this time of year, Southern California has its fire season because the Santa Ana winds, those are those really heavy winds that happen in the fall. those start to kick up. So the fire season is very cyclical and it kind of moves in a pattern across the country. So as it moves, I move. And this year alone, I have probably been to all those places I listed. I think I've been to almost all of those states this year. And most recently, Texas, because Texas has had kind of a heck of a year this year, and Oklahoma. I spent a lot of time in Oklahoma a few weeks ago. So, yeah, hope that
Hey,
answers the question. What did you say?
good old mineral wells.
Yeah.
And as a ground firefighter, I've been to 47 different states and 3 different countries, doing whether it's through engines, working with helicopters and things like that. We follow the same pattern that Maddie does. We're national resources. I'm based out of Georgia here also, and when Texas in the spring starts to crack off and Oklahoma and things like that, they call in resources from Idaho, Montana, and all those other places that are dealing with snow still. They'll move down into Texas to help out the ground resources too. So it's a lot like we're this mobile unit of wherever the fires are moving around the country. Firefighters from all over the country move to those places. During the summer season, when Montana, Idaho, Oregon, Washington had their big push this year, the southeast, we had over 3,000 firefighters from Georgia, Florida, in this area, all out west, supporting those folks. And now that their season is over, they're all out east helping us in the lower Alps, the Appalachians, and things like that, where we're still having our fires. So it's pretty cool that we get to move around and we never get stuck on one chunk of dirt for a while. Maddie always has a better view, but
That's great. And thank you both for what you do. I mean, it's quite a dedication to think about just traveling that much and the work you do to help with fires. It's amazing. So I certainly appreciate it. Can we get some reactions for Maddie and Keith and sharing a little bit? We have another question too, from Adela. How do you decide what aircrafts to use for the fires? The mountain fire that's only 60% contained as of now in California is using different types of aircraft from past fires. Um, they're really cool to see up close. So I think we talked
Yeah.
a bit about that, but how do you choose, okay, like this fire only needs one
Yeah.
aircraft or this needs them all?
That goes back to the strategy piece, right? So you if you need to hit a baseball, you got to decide, do I want to use a baseball bat? Do I want to use a tennis racket? Right? We're using the right tool for the job. So if I show up to a fire, I have to take into account what type of fuel that fire's moving in. So is it tall grass? Is it tall trees? Really heavy timber out in places like Oregon, Washington. Is it in Oklahoma where it's maybe a fast moving grass fire? So I'm going to consider things like how quickly can this aircraft go to and from the fire? What all is involved in that? Um, how much retardant? Keith talked about, the single engine air tankers, they hold about 800 gallons of fire retardant. The very large air tanker holds 10,000 almost. So if there's a really small fire, a few acres, I might choose to use that smaller tool because we don't need so much of the red stuff. We just need to quickly kind of box this in. Maybe I have, 5 or 6 of those little planes at my disposal. I might have them come in and just box that fire in. If the fire is massive, really big wildfire, and it's in very heavy timber, that aircraft that has 10,000 gallons of retardant that can deliver that, that's a perfect tool to use in that scenario. Can deliver it to the fire in these really heavy, thick coverage levels, meaning that that retardant lays very thick on the ground. So it all boils down to the right tool for the job. Another part of my job is to know what resources are available in the area. So that's kind of a part of it too. I need to understand and have awareness of who's available, who's nearby. I don't just show up and say, "Yeah, I think I'd like to have 5 air tankers on this." I need to know, if I ask for that, how long, how far away are they? Where are they stationed? So it's kind of another part of that strategy piece. I hope that answers the question.
Absolutely. And Adela mentioned, 60% contained. So what does that mean in your world, Maddie and Keith? And how do you go from uncontained to 60% contained to 30% contained? I mean, well, does that require multiple trips? What does that mean exactly?
I think, Keith, you'd probably be better equipped to answer this question than me.
So in our world, there's contain, control, and out. So as we're out fighting fire, to have a fire 60% contained means that if you have a fire in this box, 60% means that we have line around 60% of that fire that we feel comfortable that is going to hold that fire from growing any more in those directions. So if that 60% is the backside of that box, this front side of the box is going to keep burning. And then as we keep digging line using, again, ground firefighters, aerial resources to help slow the spread, things like that, we continue to gain containment of the fire. Now, when the fire gets to a controlled spot, is we're saying that this fire is controlled. We are very confident that it is not going to go anywhere, that we can start releasing resources. It doesn't mean it's a for sure dead and done kind of thing, because there still could be spots and stuff, and that's why we continue to monitor it and keep having firefighters out there. That last one, contain, control, and out. Out means that we can walk away from it. We can release Maddie to go to another fire. We can release all these resources so they can go to other places and go continue fighting different fires and things like that. I will tell you though, just because we call it out doesn't mean we walk away from it. Because when you have a large fire that's 10,000 acres, we don't have firefighters walk through those full 10,000 acres. We have only been walking the edges and inside just a little bit. So we leave firefighters out there for a very long time watching to make sure that the fire's not going to grow anymore. So, or not going to go anymore. So yeah, contain, control, and out. And as you all know, especially out west and the topography out there and the heavy fuels, sometimes it takes months and months for us to say this fire is contained, this fire is controlled, and sometimes we won't call that fire out until it has snowed and it has snowed some more, and then there is even more snow on it, and then we'll finally say that that fire is out. So that's the contain, the control, yeah.
Thank you, and you read my mind on my next question, Keith. So, because that was gonna be my next question is, how long does it take? So that's great information. Well, I've learned so much. I didn't know any of that. So thank you both. And I think this is a really exciting career. They already went into their Q&A, so maybe we'll go ahead and launch our poll. What do you think, Maddie? So think back to what we've talked about, all the different parts of being a lead plane pilot or working for forest services, and what part of the job is most interesting to you. So Maddie talked about strategizing. So this is making that plan before you get in the air. Like she said, finding out about what airplanes are nearby, what airplanes are going to be best to attack that fire. We have the sequencing, which is coordinating the different airplanes in the same area. So in that box we talked about, and then we have flying those low level maneuvers to assist the air tankers with the drops. So that's when Maddie takes the lead, they follow, she marks the spot, and they drop. So which part is most interesting to you? Here we go. And Maddie, if you want to jump in and just give a little bit more about each one, I think I did an okay job, but you're the expert.
No, I think as the questions have come up too, I think the questions have sort of spoken to those different pieces. So, you know, I'd say the part of the job that takes up the most of my brain is the strategizing and making a plan, because that really includes things like you guys talked about. How do you know what tool to use? How do you know what airplane to use? Even things like where do we want to put this retardant? There was a photo you showed where the retardant was way away from the fire. Um, and that's a decision that I might make based on the fact that I don't have a lot of resources. I only have a couple of air tankers. It's going to be a lot of time before the ground resources arrive to dig the line down to mineral soil. And as we said before, the fire retardant doesn't put the fire out. So I've got to strategize. I know I want to pick the point at which I want to slow the fire down. So how do we do that, effectively? Sequencing, it's also challenging. I enjoy it. I think it's a skill that you've got to learn, but when things really work well, that sequencing looks like, me having an air tanker behind me and having a helicopter that has just picked up off the water and sees me, and I tell him to come in behind. So we drop, the helicopter comes in, and then I might have a water scooping aircraft that after that helicopter clears comes in, and then we start that process again. And it's all just as Keith talked about, safety is paramount. But when we're doing that safely and effectively, there's just nothing like it. It's kind of like a dance. Everybody's just playing their part, and it works beautifully. And then the low level maneuvers, um, it's that's the part that makes you see the video and think it's cool. It is cool. Sometimes it's a pretty cool view. Um, there's a lot of skill in that. There's a lot of skill in trying to figure out, how I'm gonna turn this way, angle it that way. How are we gonna get out in and out of these spaces? So I don't have a favorite of these three. I personally don't have a favorite. Um, and I don't even know if I could rank them in terms of how hard they are, but I can tell you that strategizing is probably the most brain consuming part of the job.
Interesting. So our results, we have 75% pick strategizing,
Oh,
25% sequencing, and then 50% flying the low level maneuvers. So pretty mixed, which is great. But as Maddie said, you need all of them to work as a lead plane pilot. And I think that when you think about becoming, if you are interested in becoming a pilot or a firefighter, or any career in aviation or forest service, really, you need to think that it's not just one skill, right? There's a variety of skills that you need to do the job. So not focusing on one thing is really important.
yeah. And like I said at the beginning, I've done a lot of jobs in aviation. I started when I was a teenager, and I've tried a little bit of everything. All those experiences that I've had, whether I was a medevac pilot, I was an airline pilot, I was a charter pilot, all those things have actually they contribute today to the job I do now. So don't ever look over those experiences. Don't think that these things are, not multifaceted, because they are. There's a lot to these jobs, and every experience you have in aviation, including now, getting an education, you know, s- engaging in some of these forums and things like that. This is all building towards what you'll do with your career. All of it is good for you. All of it's going to help you in the future.
Every day is a lesson, right?
Absolutely.
So, Keith and Maddie, this is the point where we do a little STEM activity. So, I brought our gravity buster, which is on our Aviation for Girls app. And we can just make our simple gravity buster, everybody. It's a really quick activity. But what we'll learn about it is how weight and balance helps. And I thought the weight kind of connects with what we were talking about, the difference in the weight in the water and the weight of the retardant. So, I'm just going to go ahead and we'll switch, and I have our activity here. And please jump in if you have any ideas, Keith and Maddie. But basically, we're making this little helicopter. Uh,
Again, helicopters.
yeah, we've been focused on helicopters today a little bit, right? So the first step is to cut this out, and then you're going to cut on the solid lines. And if you want to color it, you can. For the sake of time, I'm going to skip coloring today. And it may be easier to color it after too, because then you know which part is up and which part's down. All the steps are right here, so you can follow that along. All right, so we're going to cut on the solid lines here, here, and here. And then we are going to fold along the dashed line. So we're going to fold this flap down. We're going to fold this in, and this becomes long, and then we're going to fold the two rotors. Really simple. Now, this is the point where you want to test it, and it's very hard to test it on camera. But if I test it on camera, it doesn't really rotate or spin as well. So the next step is to actually go ahead and add a staple or two. And if you don't have a staple, you can add a paper clip. And then you test it, and it's going to work a lot better. So, Maddie, do you want to tell us about how weight and balance affects flight and load, and how you all balance that with the heavy weight of the retardant and the or the water and fuel?
It's not as much of a problem for me in my airplane because I'm not carrying that retardant. The smoke stuff that I push the button and the smoke comes out. I've got a little tank for that. It's pretty small, maybe 3 gallons or something like that. But the big aircraft that drop the retardant, what's interesting is I said it in the beginning, those aircraft are the kind that you might get on to go fly across the country. So when you get on that airplane, there's seats on it, right? So there's tons of seats, rows of those seats. In the big aircraft with the retardant, they've removed those seats. So that plays a part in making sure that you're within weight limits because they couldn't leave all the passenger seats in the aircraft and also carry 3,000 gallons of fire retardant. So it's a big concern for the air tankers to ensure that they can carry that much retardant. They've already done um, things in terms of ridding themselves of unnecessary weight, but they've got to consider whether or not on some days, depending on the atmospheric conditions, whether or not they can actually carry all of that retardant. They might not be able to carry all 3,000 gallons because it's too hot. When it's
And
hot, the air gets thinner. So yeah, it's a really big concern in our industry, in aviation in general. If you become a pilot for your career, you're probably going to do a weight and balance pretty much every day that you work. It's a really important part of what we do. So,
Absolutely. And balancing it, so making sure your center of gravity is in the right place can
mhm.
seriously affect flight. So that's why when you have the paper clip on this, you'll notice that it actually flies and it rotates better than if it doesn't, because it balances that center of gravity. So you can test that maybe on a step stool or on a chair, and then you can actually see it rotate. It's unfortunate that our cameras don't allow us to see that. But it is about time for our next part. If there's no more questions for me, for Maddie, or for Keith, we had Maddie and Keith a costume contest, which we do every year. This was our third year. So people dress up as whatever they are inspired to be. So we'll see in just a minute. I'll come back to this part. Some of our entries from this year. So here we have our entries. You can see we had a GA airplane. We had 2 Blue Angels. We had a Navy pilot and I believe an Air Force pilot, a flight attendant, and search and rescue. So our comms team chose the winner, and we want to congratulate Aria for the GA. Lots of details went into your work, and we appreciate everybody. You all were amazing. We can't wait to see your costumes next year and your see what you are inspired by next year, because I know some of them have changed, and we had some repeats. So it was really great to see you all. We will email you, Aria, with some details about your prize, and everybody else. I thank you so much for participating. We're so happy that you were able to enter. So we'll go backwards actually. We have our next AFG Engage E-Learning is flying airships in January, and in December you can check out our Aviation for Girls Connect news. So we'll have some more Girls in Aviation Day features there. And then our last thing was any other Q&As before we go. This is your time. And I love the questions we had earlier. And Keith and Maddie, if there's anything else you want to wrap up or add, feel free. I have another question. So when fire season is over, what do you do?
I would love to just sit around and put my feet up and watch Netflix, but I do a lot of training, a lot of recurrent training.
Oh, okay.
We when we're not doing the job, we're training to do the job. So we do a lot of training events. Another part of my job is to audit um, contract pilots that fly a different type of aerial supervision, but I spend most of the late winter, early spring auditing contract pilots, doing check rides. So I use my instructor qualifications to do all that. So, that's what I do when the fire season's over. And then next thing you know, it started back up again. So,
Excellent. Now, how about you, Keith?
I don't allow Maddie to take time off. She needs to work every day. Just looking at you, Maddie. No, actually, for my side of things, we jump from one thing to another. Fire season was slowing down, and then being part of the Forest Service, we had hurricane response, and so we've been doing a bunch of hurricane stuff, helping out Florida, helping out North Carolina, Tennessee, things like that. We're going into our prescribed fire season where we don't use the aircraft. Well, we don't use lead planes, so to be more specific. We do use helicopters that drop little they look like ping pong balls that actually help us burn the woods more efficiently so that we don't have people out there. So on my side of things, we really don't get to slow down too much. We're jumping right to the next thing. And Patty said it best. We are always training and strategizing for what's next. And we do a lot of sand table exercises of, hey, if there was a fire here, how would you attack it? What would you do? What resources? Trying to help build that leadership for firefighters because you never know who's going to be out there actually on that line doing it. So when things truly slow down, we just fill the voids with a lot of trouble. Except for around December, we all for some reason take December off.
Excellent. And we have another question from Adela. What is your favorite aircraft to either fly or fly in? Multiple options. So what?
honestly, I of all the aircraft I've flown, from a work capacity, from it being my job, the aircraft I fly now, the King Air 200, it's boring. There's nothing special about it. I love that airplane. It's very comfortable for me to fly. I know it really well. When I'm actually doing my job the right way, I don't even notice that it's there. It's an extension of me. I know it. So I'm probably the most accustomed to and the most comfortable in and experienced in the King Air. But I've enjoyed the jets that I've flown. And in instructing, Gotten to instruct in some pretty cool stuff, some cool tailwheel airplanes, and I've gotten to fly some radial bi-wing aircraft and things like that. So I've gotten to do a lot of cool stuff, but to be honest with you, it's the King Air. That's my favorite. So
How about you, Keith?
I'm not as cool as Maddie. I haven't flown as many cool things. We used to own a little Piper 28 that I enjoyed flying immensely. Uh, my uncle owns a Glass Air 2+2 on floats. And that is my favorite airplane right now because every time we go out and land on water, and I am float plane rated, but every time we land on water, I got a giggle. I mean, it's just funny to me to land on water. So I really like my uncle's Glass Air 2+2 on floats.
I love that. We have a junior member who gets a seaplane discovery flight every so often. I would say once a year, and she loves it. So she's in our Connect News. She's one of our Connect News anchors. But that's awesome. Thanks so much. Any other questions, everyone, before we go? I want to thank you both. This has been amazing. I've learned a lot that I did not know about firefighting, a lot that I did not know about aerial firefighting, ground ops, the difference between contained and controlled and out. So this has been really amazing, and I hope our attendees really enjoyed it. Can we see some reactions before we go? Let's see if we can get some reactions going. I There we go, there we go. Thanks so much for being here, Maddie and Keith. And unless there's any other questions, I think we'll let everybody go. And if you want, you can always tune back into this on YouTube. Yeah, Maddie or Keith.
Thank you
yeah,
so much, everybody.
thank you guys for having me. I hope you guys stay engaged with aviation and keep exploring what's out there. So
And who's the best
Absolutely.
lead pilot around? Maddie Wilbanks.
Awesome. Well, thank you both so much. It has been a great Engage E-Learning, and I can't wait until we get to put this on YouTube. And if you have any questions for Keith or Maddie, you can reach out, and I can make that connection. So thank you both so much for being here again, and we'll hope to see you again soon.
Thank you, everybody. It was